Bastant. Bé, suposo que abans de començar, aquest seminari serà en anglès, d'acord? Llavors, ara jo ja presentaré en Rolf en anglès, un recordatori una altra vegada, d'aquí uns minutets, na Maria del Mau us passarà un formulari pel xat. L'heu de respondre els que sou estudiants i voleu que us compti per alguna que aquest seminari us compti per alguna assignatura del grau de Llengua i Literatura Catalanes o bé com a part del passaport cultural. Bé, thank you, Rolf, for being here. El Rolf parla català perfectament, simplement que farem...
Una miqueta.
Una miqueta, perfecte, sí, una miqueta molt. Això, simplement farem el seminari en anglès, però després podeu fer preguntes si voleu, no? Tant en català com en anglès.
Sí, clar.
So thank you, Rolf, for being here. Rolf Kailuweit is professor of Romance linguistics, Spanish and French at the Heinrich Heine University in Düsseldorf in Germany since the winter semester 2017-2018. Previously, he held the chair of Romance linguistics and media studies at the University of Freiburg in Germany as well since 2004. After studying Romance language and literatures, philosophy and law at the Freie University in Berlin and the University of Barcelona, he received his PhD from the Freie University in Berlin in 1996 with a thesis on the linguistic conflict between Castilian and Catalans in the 18th and 19th centuries. He obtained his habilitation in Heidelberg in 2003 with a study on syntax and semantics of French and Italian verbs of emotion. And today he will talk about verbs of emotion as well. So he's been working on it for a long time. His research focuses, among other topics, on the linguistic context between different Romance languages and varieties, and on pluricentric Spanish. In particular, he deals with the history of language, culture, and media in Argentina. And since 2009, he has been a corresponding member of the Academia Porteña del Lunfardo in Buenos Aires. Since May 2023, he has been the spokesperson of the Düsseldorf Working Package within the European Union Horizon Project, analysis of and responses to extremist narratives. Thank you again, Rolf, for being here. And when you want, you can start the talk.
Okay, thank you very much, Elga. And well, it's a pleasure to be here with you. It's always a little bit a strange feeling. At least I have 4 faces in front of me. The rest of the group, I have no contact at all. And if I'm now supposed to talk about 45 minutes, it's always a little bit strange. But well, we will try, and I hope I can give you a talk that you will be able to understand, and then we can have a discussion of a quarter or 20 minutes or something. Okay, so let's start. I will present you the project that is in the context of the excursion we organized last week, and we've been to your university at Palma for a week with a group of students and colleagues from the University of Düsseldorf. And this was really great because we got so many data from you students and from other people in the campus and the city. And so for us, it was really a great success. And I hope that this will be the start for a fruitful collaboration in the future. And the main topic of our project is the realization of the object experiencer with psych verbs in Catalan in comparison with other Romance languages. And today I will present corpus data we analyzed in the last months. Corpus data from Catalan, Portuguese, and Romanian. The new data we got from our excursion are mainly in Catalan, but also in Spanish. And I've been working on Spanish too for a longer time, as I will show you on some slides in the next in the following. Okay, so this is not my own work. It is especially the work of my young colleague Niklas Biskan from the Department of Linguistics of the University of Düsseldorf, and there is an important contribution by Jurina Fenner, who also had been to Palma last week, and she is one of the very few young scholars speaking fluently Romanian. So she's our expert on Romanian, and also her PhD focuses on another topic on it's more in ethno-linguistic studies on Romanian people living in Germany or living in Spain. But here she's the responsible for our Romanian data. Okay, so let's continue. How can I switch to the next slide? Okay, I will start with an introduction, and now I come to the outline. I show you what I will be talking on in the next minutes. So after a short introduction into the history of object experience and verbs research, I will explain a little bit more in detail what our approach is directed at. And then I will give an overview over the methods we used, and finally I will present you the data that we have already analyzed. And in the fourth part, I will try to give some first explanation of the results we have, and I will finish with a short conclusion and outlook. Okay, so what are object experiencer verbs? Maybe you are already familiar with some studies dealing with object experiencer verbs. There are so many in the history of syntax research in the last 30, 35, 40 years. I think one paper that is really central is the paper of Belletti and Rizzi. I will present on the next slide. Let's start just with a few examples from our corpus. So you have this Catalan example in 1a, Això ha entrestit als grassos, and the same construction with the object experiencer in the object position you find in Brazilian Portuguese, Adorno peito preocupoavo war, and also in Romanian, totul de primul. Okay, as I have already said, the study everybody refers to is the famous paper by Belletti and Rizzi, published in English in 1988. It's quite curious. You find a Spanish translation of this paper published in 87. So I suppose that this paper was already circling around for a couple of years before. And it is really the starting point of modern discussion on psych verbs. So what's the paper all about? Belletti and Rizzi claim that there are three classes of psych verbs. The first class is a class with a subject experiencer, such as in Italian temere, and you have the same verbs in Spanish or Catalan, verbs of fear, and also verbs of love or hate, etc. The second class shows an object experiencer. Here, the experiencer is in the direct object position in Italian, preoccupare. The same goes for worry in English or for préoccupé in French. But things are not that easy as far as Spanish and also Catalan are concerned. As you know, at least in Spanish, in Peninsular Spanish or European Spanish, almost all these verbs tend to a dative experiencer. But there are still some contexts where you can find an accusative experiencer with these verbs. And you find more accusative experiences in Latin American varieties of Spanish. And as you know better than I, in Catalan, as far as the norm is concerned, it is, with the exception of some verbs, a accusative you need with these type of verbs. And maybe in everyday usage, you will find more or less dative realizations too. So it is a mixed group for Spanish and Catalan. In Italian too, there are a few verbs allowing for variation. But this is a difference with the third class, verbs of the type piacere, agradar. Appeal to is not a really direct English translation because there are no dative verbs in English. So we find piacere, we find agradar, gustar, plaire, and even German gefallen with a dative experiencer. And these verbs never take an accusative experiencer, at least in this acceptation of appeal to. Most discussion has been on class 2 because this class is really tricky. The claim that Belletti and Rizzi hold was that class 3 verbs are unaccusative. So the experiencer is well, the subject, well, let me say it this way. The subject is not a real subject. It is an internal object that is unable to get an accusative from the verb. And so it is copied or moved to the subject position where it gets nominative. You know this from verbs of arriving, for example, in French and Italian, you find the auxiliary be with these verbs. Also in Old Spanish, you have these group of verbs with the auxiliary be, and these verbs are considered unaccusatives. Well, this seems to be a good analysis for piacere, for the third class verbs, but it does not really is that straightforward for class 2, because Belletti and Rizzi claim that even verbs of the preoccupata type are unaccusative. And this would explain some strange syntactic properties they have. What kind of strange properties? There is a resume you can read in Landau's small book from 2009. He is the first in calling these properties psych properties. So what kind of properties? For example, as we have already seen, this accusative dative alternations we find in Spanish. Also restriction on reflexive constructions. This is a main topic in Belletti and Rizzi's essay. So binding problems in generative linguistic terminology. There are peculiarities with periphrastic causatives, and verbal passives are excluded to some extent, and there are constraints on nominalizations. Okay, as I have already said, the psych analysis you find for class 2 in Belletti and Rizzi claims that these verbs are an accusative. But it should be unaccusative, not inaccusative. Inaccusative would be German. Okay, so unaccusative. The question that you may raise immediately, why should a verb having an accusative should be unaccusative? Well, in Spanish, you find the dative, but in most languages, and in Italian, you find an accusative. Okay, this is not really a very strong counter-argument, because it should be an inherent accusative and not a structural accusative. But there are still some questions to be solved. And one question would be, why should the largest group, the biggest group of psych verb shows such a peculiar syntactic behavior because, well, of course, our languages are accusative languages and not ergative languages. So why should an ergative and accusative construction be the default for psych verbs in our languages? And well, to explain the fact that the experience is in the object position and not in the subject position could be also motivated when we consider these verbs causative psych verbs. So verbs of loving, hating, verbs of fear would not be causative verbs, but verbs of the type preoccupare, amuse, frighten, etc., would be causative verbs. This is a claim that you find in a lot of studies in the literature, and it goes back to Grimshaw and Pisetsky. But well, there's a small problem as well. You can explain the binding, the linking difference. You can explain that the experiencer is in the subject position with love and hate, but in the object position with frighten or amuse or annoy. But then you don't have any explanation for the strange psych properties that Landau and Belletti and Rizzi pointed out. So up to now, and there is a very interesting PhD thesis by Temme from 2018. There's no solution to these questions. So we are still looking for a general description of what is going on with these verbs. Because situation is even more complicated. If you have a more detailed look on these verbs, you can see that there are subclasses. There seem to be agentive and non-agentive verbs. So you can, well, provoke the annoyment of some people, yeah, on purpose. Yeah, but it is not always possible to construct a purpose phrase, for example, with a class 2 verb. So it seems to be that there are a part of the verbs that are really exclude a controlling agent in the subject position as the non-experiencer argument. And with other verbs, this controlling agent is fine. There's also a lot of discussion on the Aktionsart properties of these verbs. Some authors claim that part of the verbs are eventive and another part are stative, and maybe a third group are following or well, according to the situation, eventive or stative. But there are no clear-cut criteria to decide on if whether a psych verb is eventive or stative. To put it in a very simplistic way, in the tradition that going back to Grimshaw, some authors consider at least part of the verbs of class 2 as accomplishments, but I don't think so, because if you have a clear accomplishment test in X time, the test is negative for almost all psych verb of class 2. It's quite strange to say something. He annoyed her in 50 minutes or something like this. Maybe seduce, but seduce is a special case. And with most verbs, these constructions are really strange. So I would claim, and most people would do so, that these verbs are not accomplishments as far as Aktionsart is concerned. They are really strange as far as Aktionsart is concerned. And another important point is causativity or not. Well, for some authors, all the group is causative, as I have already mentioned, but there is critique on this. And some authors claim that a part of these class, at least, is non-causative. But the criteria, again, are not quite clear. It's very hard to test whether a verb is causative or not. Okay. What are properties of these class that we should look at? Well, there are peculiarities as far as passive constructions are concerned, as I've already said. Passive seems to be excluded for some verbs at least. There is an interesting fact that we find for most of these verbs pronominal constructions that invert the position of the experiencer. The experiencer then appears in the subject position, as you can see in the example on this slide. Tot a mena de jocs ens divertíem amb tota mena de jocs. So it's interesting to look at these pronominal constructions to find out if this construction is possible at all, and if it is the default or not for the particular verb. We will come back to this because this is a central point in our study. You find this in English too, but only with a small subset of verbs, and worry is one verb that allows for such a construction in English without a morphological marker. So you don't have a reflexive pronoun in English that can do this work, as you know. And this could be called a label construction. It's interesting that in our corpus we found some verbs allowing for this label construction in Romance languages too. But normally in Romance languages, we have a marker. This marker is the same marker we find with real reflexives and with anticausatives. So as you can see in the Catalan example, it is ans in this first person plural, and with the third person, it is se, us. Okay, so Alexiadou and Giorgio called this pronominal construction and the relation of this pronominal construction with the active transitive construction a psychausative alternation. So it looks a little bit like an anticausative construction, but it is special to some extent. So it needs maybe a special name with a special description, for example, to make sure that for these verbs, normally the second argument appears. It can appear, and often it really do appear, as we found out in our study. Well, as I've already said, in some languages, such as German, for example, the construction is only possible with a subset of verbs. It is excluded in some cases. And the second argument is even obligatory with stören. You cannot say as molesta, sie stört sich. You have to add the non-experiencer argument. Sie stört sich an etwas, something. She is disturbed by something. And there are significant differences as far as the frequency of the inverted construction is concerned. Okay, so our study on Catalan, Brazilian, and Romanian was inspired by some recent articles and books we find for these languages, but in comparison with Spanish or French or Italian, there's not that much literature, and this was for us an argument too to start with these rather less investigated languages. We did some preliminary studies on Spanish, and we had some interesting results highlighted on this slide. So Nicholas and I, we found out that a higher degree of agentivity corresponds to a lower frequency of the pronominal construction. And we also found out that the pronominal construction seems to be more frequent with verbs tending to a dative experiencer in their active construction. So we did some corpus studies, and a verb that, for example, also in some varieties of Latin American Spanish is constructed to a higher extent with the dative in comparison with the accusative, seems to be used more frequently in the pronominal construction. And this was the starting point for our actual study, because we wanted to have a look on these constructions in Catalan, Brazilian, Portuguese, and Romanian to, well, mind the gap between rather theoretical studies that I have referred to, starting from Belletti and Rizzi and going on till, well, the last years, and empirical studies that are still lacking in this field. There are some empirical studies, but not that much. Often, people just refer to a very small set of examples and try to build up a big theory on this. And if you have a look on a little bit more extended corpus of data, you see that, well, the theoretical buildings are supposed to fall down. So we wanted to, well, retrieve more data to have a better base for theoretical speculation. And we still have in mind all this discussion on unaccusativity, on causativity, on psych properties, etc., etc. And in the end, we would like to contribute to this discussion, but on a larger database. Okay, so the design of our study was the following. We wanted to find out, with a still not very extensive corpus. In the end, we have 200 occurrences for each verb we have on our list. But with these 200 occurrences, we wanted to find out how frequent is the pronominal construction, and can we really conclude something from this fact. And it would be interesting to see what kind of non-experiencer arguments appear, also with which prepositions we would have liked to have a look on word order, because there's also a claim in the literature that class 2 verbs have a different word order from the normal word order in Romance languages. And finally, we would like to find out if there's anything in the data that helps us to conclude on the semantic dimensions, and to say a word on agentivity and on causativity. But this is really difficult as far as corpus linguistic approaches are concerned. And of course, we would like to do a comparative study and compare verbs of different classes in one language and also 3 languages, as you already know. Well, so our languages are Catalan, Brazilian, Portuguese, and Romanian. We want to see this as a starting point for a investigation dealing also with Spanish, European Portuguese, French, and Italian, but this will be in the future. We had 4 verbs per language in our sample, and these verbs stem from what is called the basic emotion. You may know that there's a discussion on what is an emotion, and seminal work was done by Ekman and other psychologists, psycholinguists, and they claim that there are some basic emotions that are represented by a special facial expression. Yeah, you can have a smiley, of course, laughing or being sad, etc., or being angry. So basic emotions among maybe a very short set of others are anger, fear, happiness, and sadness. And so we need for each language a verb for, well, meaning more or less disturb in English, worry, amuse, and depress. And these verbs should be sufficiently frequent. Maybe we decided not to take the most frequent verb of each language, but at least a highly frequent verb to have enough corpus data. And we wanted to choose cognates, so verbs stemming from the same Latin origin, but it was not always possible as explained to you. For example, for sadness, I had a look on Catalan, deprimir, but it was not frequent enough to make the way into our study. So we finally decided to take entristí, that is more frequent as deprimir in the corpus we used. And as you can see, for some pairings, we have cognates, divertir, divertir, molestar, molestar, but it is deprimir in Portuguese and in Romanian, but it was not always possible for all three languages. And of course, this is a problem, so we have to think about this. Maybe there will be an influence on the results stemming from the fact that the verbs are not cognates. Well, these are our corpora. So for Catalan, I used this corpus from the Institute d'Estudis Catalans. And you see the corpora for the other languages. The annotation parameters were the following. We did it by manual annotation. So I, in the first place, had a look on Catalan data, Nicholas on Portuguese data, and Julina on Romanian data. And then we discussed cases, and we had a second look on the results of the other people. Okay, the parameters are the one you see on the right hand. So first of all, voice, active, eventive passive, stative passive, pronominal, or labile intransitive. It was always assigned because one of these possibilities is always given. Then we had a look on the word order. And of course, they may be a zero for both. Then we only have a verb, but normally we have a non-experiencer argument n in the pre-verbal position or in the post-verbal position, and an experiencer in the pre-verbal position or the post-verbal position. We annotated the semantic type of the non-experiencer argument, animate if it was a person or animal, concrete for a concrete object, abstract for abstract terms, event for an infinitive or a subordinate clause with an eventive interpretation, and state for an infinitive or a clause with a stative interpretation. Then we had a look on the non-active constructions, and with these constructions, the experience appears in the subject position. So the second argument, the non-experiencer, could be expressed by, or if it is expressed, it will be expressed by a preposition. These constructions are never transitive, so if the non-experiencer argument appears, it needs a preposition. And we had a look on the kind of prepositions that came up. And well, as far as case is concerned, with the active constructions and third person, we had a look on well, markers of dativity, so maybe a dative pronoun or a this is complicated, of course, an A marker in Catalan, or even in Portuguese, or P marker in Romanian. And we also had a look on redundancy of a pronoun, accusative or dative, and a full NP for the experiencer. Okay, so have a look on a annotation result. Maybe we just consider the Catalan example. It's a simple one. S'entristien pensant que aquelles niñas, etc., etc. So the language is Catalan. The verb is entristi. The construction is the voice of the construction is pronominal. We have a non-experiencer argument in the postverbal position, pensant que. And we have no NP for the experiencer. It is the subject included in the verb. The semantic type of pensant que aquellas niñas is state, if we consider pensar a stative verb. There is no preposition in this case, so well, I have to well, say this. If it is an infinitive, of course, there's no preposition. And yeah, so there's no expression of case because the experiencer is in the subject position. We had to exclude some data, and here we have a Romanian examples that I will not go into detail because my Romanian is not very good, but I can tell you what the problem is with these constructions. In the first case, we have a clear non-psych verb use of the verb. So there's no experiencer, and so this construction should be excluded. In the second case, we have a meta-linguistic use. So it is discussion on the verb and not a use of the verb. So this is very special, but we find it, and so we have to make a decision on this, and we excluded it. Let's come to a description of our data. And I will start with some general impressions. So we found a lot of variability in voice, and also in word order, in argument types, and in prepositions. And there were no clear-cut distinctions. So it was not the case that one verb appears with the same preposition in the pronominal construction, and another verb maybe with another preposition. And it was not the case that one verb almost all the time appears in the active construction and another verb in the pronominal construction. There were lots of variation, but some tendencies. And well, this is a good starting point for dealing with theoretical claims, because generally theoretical claims, generative grammar, for example, just work for well, coherent data. So you have to say that all these verbs will take the same preposition in the psych work acceptance, at least, and all these verbs are eventive, or all these verbs have as a default the experiencer in the preverbal position or something like this. And well, it's not the case. Have a look, let's just have a look on the three languages. For Catalan, for example, there was a clear division and balance between active and pronominal constructions, and almost no passives. There were some passives, but less passives than in the other two languages. And in Portuguese, we found the largest variation in voice. So a lot of eventive passives and a lot of stative passives. And in Romanian, and this is really curious, we found the largest variation in prepositions. And this goes totally against the claim of Alexiadu and Jorda in her in their quite famous paper from 2014, where they claim that in this special psych acceptance of the Romanian verbs, the preposition should be always the la, a composition of two prepositions. And well, we have to admit that we don't find any occurrence of this preposition, but we found a lot of other prepositions. Okay, so what are our first results as a hypothesis for further empirical studies? So we would see in our results that morphosyntactic and distributional behavior of the verbs is not arbitrary. There are some general conclusions we can find or we can, well, we can say that there are some systematic relations among languages and verbs. And in general, the results are that the verbs of different languages with a similar meaning, so of the same basic emotion, behave similar in the data. So the behavior seems to be better predicted by semantics than by language if we consider semantics in a rather universal way. Of course, there are aspects aspects of semantics, as you can see on the slide, that refer to a specific linguistic culture in general, but then also linguistic culture. And so we expect at least some details in the behavior of the verbs that are not that cannot be explained by universal rules. But on the other hand, it seems to be that the emotion type, the basic emotion as a universal semantic prime, has an impact on the syntactic behavior in all the languages. And I will show you that this holds not only for Romance languages, but even for other languages too. Okay, so let's have a look on the four basic emotion classes. And we will start with anger and the disturbed verbs. These verbs are frequently active. We find a lot of eventive passives in Brazilian Portuguese, but this would be also would also confirm these claim that these verbs are rather active, because the eventive passive is only possible if the verb has a strong transitivity, you know, as a strong contrast between the two arguments. And there are few pronominal constructions of disturbed verbs in Catalan and Portuguese, more in Romanian. The non-experiencer argument is frequently animate, and if it is not animated, it is abstract. Romanian énerva deviates to some extent from Catalan and Brazilian molestar. We find more pronominal constructions, and well, our solution would be, or our interpretation would be, that molestar is closer to a typical agent-patient verb, even if we exclude, and we wanted to exclude this, the interpretations where molestar well, refers clearly to sexually harass and not to the emotional side, as focused on well, the non-experiencer argument and what he or she is doing, and not on the person that is emotionally affected by this. Okay. For worry, preocupar, we still find a large proportion of pronominal constructions, but there are still some actives left. So we cannot say that this verb is almost every time constructed as a pronominal. There is a clear preference for the realization of the non-experiencer argument. So we find a PP construction in non-active voices. And this is curious because, as you know, on the discussion of anticausatives, it is a part of the definition of an anticausative that the cause is excluded from the argument structure. So anticausative constructions are monovalent. They just have one argument, the passive argument, the subject position. But our psych verbs in the pronominal construction, at least if they are of the worry group, show a clear tendency to a two-argument realization, to the realization of two arguments, the experience and the non-experiencer argument. The non-experiencer argument is of all semantic types, and Romanian in Grijora deviates a little bit because we find less pronominal constructions and more passives. As far as happiness, amuse is concerned, the clear majority, more than 80% of the verbs of the occurrences in our corpus are pronominal constructions, and the rest are actives. In this case, the non-experiencer PP is dispreferred. So amuse looks rather as a typical causative anticausative. The non-experiencer argument is of all semantic types when realized. And we find a little bit variation if we compare Catalan and Brazilian divertir with Romanian distra. But this is not really significantly. Depress as the verb for sadness shows in the three languages a tendency towards the pronominal construction in Catalan and Romanian, and to stative passives in Brazilian. And there's a strong preference against the non-experiencer PPs in non-active voices. And this is also curious, we find quite frequent active constructions with the non-experiencer argument realized. That means that this is only the non-experiencer argument realized. So this situation depresses, and it's not said who is depressed by this situation. The experiencer is a general experience. There's a strong preference for abstract non-experiencer arguments when realized, so this situation, for example. And you find some deviation with a Romanian de prima that shows less active constructions. Just a word on word order, because well, it would have been so nice to really approve or contradict the claim made by Fabregas and others in 2017 that the unmarked word order is experiencer verb, non-experiencer argument for class 2 verbs. But in the end, we have not the data to refute or confirm this hypothesis. we are talking about constructions, as you can see here, Aisho molesta molta gen, Aminio molesta fum. So we can have a active construction with a non-experiencer argument in the pre-verbal position, or we can have an active construction with the experiencer, marked in this case by R in Catalan, in the pre-verbal position. A mí no me molesta. Yeah, but from our data, we cannot say that the second one is the default. We have this in the data, but it is not really more frequent than the other construction with the non-experiencing argument in the subject position. And in the end, we do not find that much occurrences where those arguments are realized as full NPs, so that there is a choice. Often one argument is just realized by a pronoun, or the subject is just the verb ending. So, and other cases in which the position of one, at least of the two arguments, is fixed by the syntactic context. So there's no choice. And if there's no choice, we cannot claim that there's a preference for E, we, N word order. So we will continue to have a look on this, but up to now, the result is rather negative. We cannot confirm the claim made by Fabregas and others. Okay, so let's come to real results. And the first one that is interesting is voice. There's a hierarchy, as you can see on this slide, as far as the frequency of the active construction is concerned. It is for all languages the most frequent construction for disturb, and then comes depressed, then worry, and for amuse, the active construction is less frequent. And as far as the pronominal construction is concerned, it is the other way. It is the other way around. The flashes are inverted. So for Catalan and Brazilian Portuguese, and for Romanian, disturb changes the place because of passive constructions. You can see the distribution here. There are a very small number of real reciprocals. There are the blue ones, the pronominal construction, and you can see this with diverti, for example, that most, there's clear tendency towards the pronominal construction. We find some pronominal, we find some stative passives, very few in Catalan, but in the other languages, and even a few number of labile intransitive constructions, and then a lot of active constructions, especially with molestar in Catalan and Brazilian Portuguese, and in Romanian, as you can see, it is also énerva and deprimi that are deprima in Romanian, that are the verbs that appear most frequently in the active construction. As far as the prepositional construction of the non-experiencer argument is concerned, I have already said that this construction is preferred with worry. It is more or less neutral, a neutral option with disturb, but dispreferred in Romanian. And it is clearly dispreferred with amuse and depress in all three languages. So the overall hierarchy would be the one you see in the middle of the slide. You find the second argument in general with worry, and then comes disturb, then depress, and then amuse. And there's a lot of variation as far as the prepositions are concerned. And I have already said a word on Romanian de la that we do not find in the data. And another really strange claim is that Brazilian Portuguese realizes always the non-experiencer argument with com. And this is clearly not the case. We found a lot of variation. Okay, so have a look on the statistics. You see that for preocupar, we have almost 80% of a second argument introduced by preposition in Catalan and in Brazilian Portuguese, and for divertir and deprimir, it is the other way around. As far as the semantic type is concerned, we find all kind of non-experiencer arguments, and this is a definition of a psych verb. A psych verb always allows for any kind of syntactic realization of the non-experiencer argument, but are there tendencies? Well, not really. And can we claim that the verbs that have a rather high degree of animate non-experiencer arguments are more agentive? Well, maybe, but it is always a question of interpretation. The only clear cases of an agent are cases as you can see on the right hand, en les seves paraules, hi havia un afany de molestar-me. So in this case, of course, there's an intention to provoke the emotion in the experiencer, but for other animate subjects of molestar, it is not clear if it is an intention to disturb the experiencer, or is it just a quality or something that the person does not on purpose that is a disturbance for the experiencer? Okay, so this is the statistic for this. A lot of gray fields, so there's no non-experiencer argument, and the other distributions are as you see. What is obvious is the big blue fields with molestar. So with molestar, the animate non-experiencer argument is quite frequent. This is better seen here, and this statistics where the gray field is just suppressed. And if we look for a correlation between active voice and an animate realized second argument, it looks like this. So there is a, well, there is a correlation, but as you see, it is statistically not easy to construct this. Okay, a little bit of interpretation to come to an end. Well, the hierarchies that I showed you could be interpreted in a way that there is a correlation between emotion and syntactic properties, and that language-specific variation is not that dominant in the data. And well, what we would like to find out is if there is a correlation between voice frequencies and causativity, and a correlation between voice and semantic type of non-experiencer argument. And so would it be the case that a higher frequency of the pronominal construction correlates with less animates and more eventualities, and a lower frequency of the pronominal construction with more animates? And is there a positive correlation between the ratio of animate and piece and of active voice per verb? Well, all over these claims are confirmed by the data. The benefit of this comparison is, as I've already said, that the correlations are not arbitrary or language specific. They seem to be, well, really related to the type of emotion that a verb expresses. And this can be confirmed if we have a look on other languages that are not Romance languages, so for example, German or Dutch, and even, well, typologically totally different languages such as Tswana, a Bantu language from Atlantic Congo. Well, of course, there are still some challenges. We have to question the comparability of the data. They stem from different corpuses. They are annotated by different annotators, and we have to look critically on the annotation criteria and values. And we see that the word order patterns were hardly analyzable for the data set we have. Maybe with more data, we can say a word on this. And so it remains unclear if the choice of words order is driven by information structure or if there's really a intrinsic syntactic or syntactic semantic trigger for a special word order with class 2 verbs. What should we do? We should have some extension as far as the verb sample is concerned. We should have more than one verb for each emotion. We should have more languages. And we have to work a little bit on the corpora and on the restrictions on data retrieval. So in conclusion, what did we do? We identified a problem at the syntax-semantics interface of object experiencer verbs, especially in Romance languages, but also in other languages. We worked on 3 languages, Catalan, Brazilian, Portuguese, and Romanian, and 4 verbs per language. We studied 2,400 tokens, and we looked for correlations among the parameters voice, word order, semantic type of the arguments, the argument PPs in non-active voices, and at least for, or at least for all of these parameters, except word order, we have some results. The outcomes are the following. Object experiencer verbs with similar meanings behave similarly in corpus data and our corpus data. There's evidence for interaction between some of the parameters. And the results fit into a broader cross-linguistic pattern if we look at studies on other languages we know. What will we do in the future? We would like to investigate a larger sample of Romance languages and more verbs. And we will try with the help of statistical models to prove the interaction between the parameters and see if there are really correlations or not. And we hope that we can come up in the future with a language independent model for the semantic interface of these verbs. I already said in the introduction that we had the luck of being financed by the Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst. So it was possible to come to Mallorca last week, and we will organize a workshop at the University of Düsseldorf in September, where some of the professors here present will be also coming and showing their own work on psych verbs. And this will be maybe the starting point for a broader network for further projects and applications on different Romance languages. We were not alone with our study. We had a lot of help from nice people, people that helped us with the corpus in Bucharest, and people that helped us analyzing the data. Düsseldorf, Janis Jacobs, for example, and people that helped us having a look at Catalan data, Carlos Arroyo and Elga. So thank you a lot. These are the references, and this is all. Thank you.